Hello lovely couples and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lauren, wedding planner and owner of Bluebird Creative, and I provide a weekly dose of wedding planning goodness for the modern couple. Now if you haven't already, then make sure you subscribe to my channel guys. Don't forget to hit the bell because then you'll be notified every week when a new video lands. So this week should be quite a fun video for you. I had quite a lot of couples interestingly this year. So for 2021, a lot of my weddings, or maybe like half of my weddings I think, actually had international couples. Now I didn't travel, I had all my weddings over here in the UK, and if you didn't see last week's video, I made a point of saying that I would not make a destination wedding planner. However, I had a lot of couples from other countries. I had couples from the USA, I had couples that were, and in fact they were all American. They were all American brides marrying English grooms. One of them lived out in, a couple of them lived in the States and one of them lived in Chile, which was amazing. And they're all fantastic. And it's so nice to be able to help couples that are getting married in this country but are planning from afar. In fact, we have some more American and English couples next year. Again, bride's American and groom's English. I think we've got one couple from Boston, and I can't remember off the top of my head where one of our other couples is. So we do a lot of planning for couples that want to get married over here, which is really exciting, which made me think that it would be really good to do a video for you, because I know a lot of you are, a lot of our audience, in fact we've got a 50-50 audience of USA and UK. So I thought I'd do a video comparing the differences between a UK and a USA wedding. Now, just as a little disclaimer at the beginning, I haven't done a US wedding. I've obviously done UK weddings, but having worked with American clients, I know some of the traditions that are different. So I'm basing it off of that information and not having actually done an American wedding. But if you know of any differences that I don't mention in this video, then absolutely put them in the comments box below and fill me in. Or if I've got anything a bit wrong, then put it in the comments box below and let's chat about it, because I find it so exciting to see the differences, the different traditions, the different names for things. And even from you guys just commenting on some of my videos, which are all very much focused on English weddings. And I know, like, one of the things I'm going to mention, you're like, why do you do it like that? You know, or why is it called this? And it's actually just lost in translation. It's just called something else, whereas you do know it. You just didn't know the name of it. So I'll stop rambling and let's jump into this week's video. So let's start at the beginning of the whole like wedding planning process as such, and actually talk about like the hen and stag do's. Now, if you're in the US, you might be wondering what on earth I'm talking about when I say hen and stag do's. Well, that is what us British call your bachelorette and your bachelor parties. So you guys call it a bachelor and a bachelorette party, and we call it a hen and stag do. I have absolutely no idea why. I don't know the history behind that, but that's what we do. And then over here in the UK, that seems to have basically spread itself across a weekend, except for over the last year where it's gone back to a day because COVID restrictions. Usually it's like all the girls going away for a weekend. There's usually loads of games involved, a lot of drinking involved, usually fancy dress. It's usually a bit chaotic. Stag do's are the same. I swear stag do's tend to usually go abroad nowadays. They'll go off to Amsterdam, they'll go off to Vegas, they'll go off to Portugal, and they'll have a very, very boozy weekend. Again, usually ending up with just them dressing up the stag, whereas, you know, the girls, they all dress up and do fancy dress. So that's just kind of generalising, but that's how it works over here, and the difference is the names. I don't know how a bachelorette or a bachelor party works, so if it sounds different, then let me know in the comments box below. So a really, really big difference over here to do with the wedding, and I'm moving on to this one because I'm kind of thinking about invites. So when you're sending out your invites in the US, you send out an invite to a guest to your wedding for the day, and that's it. That's what you do. Over here in the UK, we have two types of invites. That's right, my friends. We have a day invite and we have an evening invite. So a day invite is where a guest is invited to the ceremony, the drinks reception, which is called the cocktail hour in the US, and the wedding breakfast, which is the sit-down meal in the US, and the evening reception, which is the dancing in the evening. So they are invited to the whole shindig, okay? Evening guests, They turn up after the meal. They are only there for the party after the meal. They usually make it for the cake cutting, for the first dance, and then for the party. Okay, so those guests are usually people that they're not in your inner circle. They are like party friends, maybe work colleagues, younger friends, plus ones, that kind of thing. They're the guests that they won't be offended if they're not invited to the day. Maybe they're a newer friend and you only have a set budget. So I personally think, being a UK person and this being normal, I think it's great because it helps with budget. If you don't have the budget to have everybody that you want there for the whole day, you can still party with all those sorts of friends, but you're not having to pay for them to be there throughout the whole day. So it works really nicely, and people over here do not get offended by that, guys. I know there's probably a lot of you watching this in the US thinking, oh my God, that's crazy, but it's not crazy over here. It's totally normal and we don't get offended by it. Whereas I know in the US, you just have day invites, you're invited to the wedding, so you're invited to the whole of the wedding, which I do totally get. So that's one massive difference that we have here in the UK compared to in the US. Next, we have the bridal party. Now, there's a few differences here when it comes to the bridal party and then into the ceremony as well. Now, I have heard, and I don't know if this is right, so again, let me know, but over in the US, the bridesmaids have to pay for their own dresses. I don't know if that's true. I just heard that. Tell me if it's true or not. Whereas over here in the UK, a lot of the time, the bride and groom will pay for the bridesmaids' dresses. They'll also pay for the groomsmen's suits. They'll hire them or buy them for them, but not always. Now couples will ask the bridesmaids and that to buy them for themselves. But normally, the couple will buy the dresses for the bridesmaids because they're asking them to be their bridesmaids. They're making them have a particular dress, so therefore they're buying it because it's their choice. So I think that's how we see it over here. I don't know if it's different in the US, so again, please do let me know. But also over here, we have bridesmaids, maid of honour. I know that in the US you have bridesmaids, might be maid of honour, might be matron of honour when somebody's already married, and you sometimes have chief bridesmaid as well, which we don't have over here. And then over here, we just have best men and ushers, which I know is different because in the US you have groomsmen and sometimes ushers and best men. So there's some more roles going on over there. Another difference with bridal parties, groomsmen, etc. is how it works in the ceremony. Now over here in the UK, it is tradition for the bride to walk down the aisle first. So the bride goes down the aisle and then the bridesmaids follow down the aisle behind the bride. In the US, you have your bridal party go down first and then the bride is last. A lot of UK couples or brides are now adopting that US tradition, which I even did myself because I'm not being funny, guys. The bridesmaids don't get their moment because everyone's eyes are going to be on the bride, so they're not even seen behind, but it also is just such a nice build-up. The music starts, like your guests see the bridesmaids coming, it's really exciting, then the bride has her moment afterwards. I think it's so much nicer, but traditionally over here in the UK, it is bride first, then bridal party, but that is starting to change. But that's what the tradition is. Then in the US, I know that the bridal party will go down the aisle and then they will all stand throughout the ceremony with the bride and groom. Whereas over here in the UK, the bridal party will go down and then they will take their seats once the bride gets to the front with the rest of the guests. They don't stand up there. It is just the bride and groom that stand up there. So I know that that's quite a big difference as well. I've also heard that in America, the groom will turn around to see the bride walking down the aisle. Whereas traditionally over here in the UK, the groom will stand facing the front and he won't see the bride until she arrives up the aisle. But that's not really a strict tradition over here. And I think a lot of grooms now will turn to see their bride. Something else that you'll notice that's different between a UK and a US wedding. In the UK, we are a big fan of a hat. Now, if you've watched any of the royal weddings on the TV, for example, you'll notice that everybody is adorning a wonderful and wild hat. We do love a hat over here in the UK. It's definitely more of a tradition, so younger generations aren't adopting hats as often. You'll usually find that it's like mums and nans that are wearing hats. Some younger generation might be wearing a small fascinator as opposed to a hat. but it's definitely becoming less of a thing as we go down the generations. But I know that in the US, hats just aren't really a thing at weddings at all, whereas in the UK, it is definitely still a thing. And the more traditional a couple is, the more hats you'll see at a wedding. I think couples that tend to have marquee weddings in their back garden with the church wedding, that still have a lot of the traditions, the old-fashioned traditions. That doesn't mean to say that they're bad when I say old-fashioned, but that just keeping those traditions, you'll find that they probably have a lot more guests that are wearing hats. A couple that's having a festival wedding, for example, that's less traditional, and you'll probably notice that there's probably not many hats worn at a wedding like that. So let's move on to the wedding breakfast. Now, I have seen comments on my videos before when I've talked about the wedding breakfast asking if you can have another meal other than breakfast. Now guys, just to clarify, and I actually learned something new in the last week about this as well, but just to clarify, wedding breakfast does not mean that you're having scrambled eggs on toast or smoked salmon. Like, you're not having breakfast, okay? It is called the wedding breakfast because traditionally it's the first meal that you're having together as a couple. So it is the breakfast. And then what I learned in the last week as well is that it's also called that because back in the day, you used to fast before the wedding. Apparently the couple used to fast, and then that was their first meal after the fast, hence the breakfast as well. So there's a couple of different like meanings to it, but that is essentially what it is. I don't know if it's called something else in the US, but I do get a lot of people asking that in the comments on my videos about why does it have to be breakfast? That's what it's called over here, guys. And usually that is a 3-course sit-down meal. That is the most common type of meal that people will have. You'll have a starter. I seem to have the sun that's now jumping in on my face. Usually you'll have a starter, a main, and a dessert. And that dessert does not consist of your cake, which I know is another difference. But that is the usual typical thing that couples will have over here in the UK. Other couples do decide to do something different. They might decide to have a hog roast. They might decide to have street food and so on. But usually we have starter, main, and dessert. I know that in the US that's not always the case. But again, let me know. Usually a wedding breakfast over here in the UK is roughly about 2 hours, but it does depend on how many guests you are having at the wedding. And then we usually have the speeches. Now, traditionally, the speeches would go after the wedding breakfast, but nowadays people choose to put them in different places. I always advise going before or after, or maybe splitting them before and after. It's nice for the father of the bride's speech to be before the meal. It kind of welcomes everybody in. Some couples over here in the UK decide to put speeches in between every single course. I do not recommend this. It breaks everything up. It's also really difficult for your caterers, really difficult for all your suppliers, your photographer, your videographer. That's actually their time to sit down and eat as well. And I know it's your wedding day, but I just feel that they deserve to just sit down for an hour. And it means that they're up and down the whole time. So it's not a great idea all round. All before or all after is a really good idea. And then just limiting the speeches so that they're not too long. Because if you're putting them in between the different courses, maybe you're worried that it's going to be too long, but trust me, it just breaks it up too much. And I think it's better all before or all at the end, or a bit before and a bit at the end. Now, I do believe that in America, the speeches are a little bit tamer, and that the groom, for example, will just do a quick thank you speech. Whereas over here in the UK, we have the father of the bride's speech, which is usually quite emotional and sentimental. We'll have the groom's speech, which is a thank you, and he'll usually thank all the suppliers, thank everybody for coming. It is a speech. It's not a quick thank you. It's usually the same length as the father of the bride's speech. They'll usually talk about their wife and their journey to getting married, and it's usually a really lovely speech. And then we have the best man's speech, and that is usually a bit of a roasting on the groom. It's not sentimental. It's not emotional. It's usually, and these are, when I'm saying usually, this is generically, because I can't talk about each specific couple. Everybody is slightly different, but usually it is a bit of a roasting towards the groom. After the wedding breakfast, the couple will go and do their cake cutting. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do a cake cutting as well as having dessert. Not all couples decide to do that, but traditionally and typically people will have a dessert and then they will have the cake. They will cut the cake and then that will be handed out during the evening snacks later on. It is very rarely chosen to be the dessert for couples over here in the UK. Very, very rarely will they cut the cake and then serve it for the dessert. In fact, I've never personally had a couple do that ever. Whereas I believe in the US that is what you do. Whereas we will pretty much always have a dessert and then cut the cake, they take the cake away, and usually it's brought out at about 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the evening, when there's like some late night snacks and people can help themselves to cakes and whatever savoury snack you've decided to have for your wedding. Another thing that might be a bit of a surprise for US couples is over here in the UK, when it comes to the evening bar, it is usually a paid bar. Guests usually buy their own drinks. It's not on the couple's tab. They may have had a tab for the day, but in the evening it's usually a cash bar. Whereas I do believe that in the US it is usually an open bar in the evening and the couple will cover all the drinks. But just remember that over here in the UK, we're inviting extra evening guests. They're usually there for a big party. They haven't been drinking all day. It could end up being so expensive. So it's usually a cash bar. And then finally, over here in the UK, weddings tend to go on until between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. if your venue happens to have a late license. Whereas I have heard that over in the US, weddings will tend to sort of like wrap up at around 10 o'clock. I could be wrong. So again, do let me know in the comments box below. But we do like to party over here. There's usually a lot of drinking going on at a wedding. They can be a bit raucous. It's so much fun, but they can be a really long day, especially if somebody's got married at 12 o'clock. But that doesn't often happen over here. Usually couples will get married between 1 and 2 p.m. and then it goes on till about 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. depending on the venue's license. So there you go, guys. Quite a few differences, but also there's lots of similarities between weddings. And I love that each country has slightly different traditions. I would love to know more about the American traditions. So if there's anything that I haven't talked about, as I mentioned, then put them in the box below. If I've got anything wrong, then let me know. Obviously, all the UK information that I've given is correct. But yeah, I hope you found that fun and I hope you found that interesting to see the differences. I love being able to work with couples from America coming over to the UK. So if you guys are thinking of doing that and you've got any questions, then please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Don't forget to subscribe and I will see you next week for some more wedding planning goodness.